Welcome to Ordinary Teachers and Students, where we get to hear teachers and students tell us their extraordinary stories. My hope is that through this podcast, ordinary teachers from around the world can relate to the stories they hear and get some timely suggestions and ideas. My name is Alan Cheng, and I'm a secondary school teacher in the UK, a life coach, and a former university lecturer. My mission is to make the education system a better place for all. Today, I'm delighted to invite Chris Misselbrook onto our podcast. Chris is a mental fitness coach and training provider. He recently left teaching to become the director of his business MindFirst Education Ltd, which helps both teachers and leaders in schools to overcome stress and reduce burnout. Previously, he was a secondary school PE teacher and the head of the department. Chris went through a crippling mental health episode due to the stress in education and is here to share with us how that changed him and the way he sees mental health. He's delivered talks on school improvement at the London Excel Centre and Birmingham NEC, presented at multiple education conferences, coached head teachers, leaders and teachers to live life without overwhelm, facilitated mental fitness workshops with thousands of people, both online and face-to-face, as well as trained over 100 people to become mental health first aiders. That's why I'm very excited to speak to Chris today. Let's welcome Chris. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Alan. Great to be here. Thank you for the intro.
Almost lost my breath speaking. Like, it's such a long intro, isn't it? Right? But are there any points that you wanted to elaborate on? Because, like, obviously, there's so many things there that we can talk about. Any particular things that you want to highlight to the audience?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, loads of stuff. I mean, for clarification, the thousands of people in a workshop, that it's not that it's not 1,000 people in one workshop. That be a keynote speech. But yeah, it's just over the last 5 years, probably, my work within mental health and mental fitness and working with individuals in the coaching space as well as the training space is just developed over the last 5 years, and it is genuinely such a privilege to be able to support other people to either prevent going through what I went through in terms of crippling burnout, or if they are suffering, to have the knowledge and the tools and the training to actually support people to come back from burnout and thrive. It's this was when I coach someone, my favorite thing is at the end of a coaching program, if it's sort of a set amount, because the progress that people make is just gorgeous. Had a teacher yesterday on their final coaching call, and it's just so lovely to see them change. And I did the burnout check. So I've got a burnout assessment that people take, and when she was at the start of a journey, she was, there's 5 stages in the model that I use, and she was like ticking every box on up to stage 3 on burnout. So it's a real point, stage 3. And she was just about sort of managing, but yesterday when we had the call and I went back through that, and she was barely at stage 1.
Oh, wow. That's amazing progress. Yeah.
And that, I guess, is, well, I don't guess, it absolutely is what drives me. And so
Sure. From my interactions with you, I can tell that you're really clearly passionate about education. So obviously I mentioned earlier that you started off as a teacher. Do you want to tell us, like, what made you become a teacher in the first place? Were you always wanting to become a teacher?
I always enjoyed school
and
learning, and thought when I was at school that I thought I would enjoy teaching and thought I'd be quite good at it, but it wasn't my first career choice, if you like. It was really as a failed first choice. I went to teaching and then quite enjoyed it. So I was initially I've always wanted to be in the military. So
Okay. Yeah.
I went to the army in for my year 10 work experience, and just
Mm.
really the lifestyle, the idea of serving your country and helping other people, not too dissimilar to the idea of teaching, really.
Mm.
Um, and but ended up wanting to apply to become an officer in the Navy.
Yeah.
And after university, I applied, but failed the first exams that you have to take on the entry,
Mm.
so metric exams, and I failed them at officer level, and my ego got the better of me. I could have gone in at a rating level, which is not a commissioned officer.
Yeah.
Uh, I didn't want to do that. My ego got the better of me. They
Mm.
invited me back 12 months later to do the test again, but within that time, I started doing some work in schools as a cover
Right.
supervisor, and
Mm.
really loved it and really enjoyed it.
Mm.
And
Mm. Mm.
I guess I was scared of taking the tests again and failing,
Mm.
because
Mm.
what does that mean about me? If I fail, I'm a failure. I've already failed once. It did cripple
Mm.
my self-esteem and self-belief. And teaching came quite naturally to me.
Mm.
And then I did my PGC and just really enjoyed it. Really
Mm.
enjoyed it.
Mm. Brilliant.
Uh,
Brilliant.
and that's how I accidentally became a teacher, but stayed in the career for 15 years, and absolutely loved it. Like, the sense
Yeah.
of helping others is the best bit, but also I think in many ways the worst bit, because there's no end to the job. You just have to,
Mm. So
you know,
true.
that sort of drives a lot of um people to overwork, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. And also in the intro, I mentioned that you went through like a mental health episode. I wonder if you're okay to share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah, of course. I'm very open about my mental health situation. I think it's important to be. So I guess it's in part linked with my story about the Navy.
Yep.
When I started teaching, I didn't realize this at the time. It was quite a subconscious level of thinking, but I wanted to prove to the Navy that I was successful, but sort of
Ah,
through
interesting. Yeah.
as I say, I didn't know this at the time. I've
Mm.
worked this recently to discover this, or to potentially discover this, whether it's true or
Mm.
not, uh, who knows. But I always wanted the next promotion. I worked really, really hard. I was quite good, and I never was happy with the present professional moment that I was in. I
Mm.
always wanted to better myself. I don't think that's a terrible trait, but I was doing it for negative reasons. I was
Mm.
doing it to gain external validation over
Mm.
my professional accolades, if you like,
Yep.
successes, and was always placing this idea of happiness in achieving the next goal.
Mm.
And uh, I'll remind me to speak about how I define happiness later
Yep.
on, because I've worked on that. But so that led me to wanting to go for the next promotion and overwork, and that was sort of the start of my burnout syndrome, really.
Mm. Mm.
I wanted to be a head of department for many reasons. I genuinely thought I'd be good at it, and I've got a lot of natural leadership skills, and I like
Yep.
to lead others and be in charge. And also, as a head of department, my perception was that you could have a bigger and wider impact on education, because you'd
Mm.
be able
Mm.
to drive change and influence things in a bigger sense.
Mm.
So I applied for a few jobs and eventually became head of department in a new school.
Mm.
And so I moved schools, which is stressful anyway for a lot of
True.
people.
Yeah, definitely.
If we talk about I talk about a stress bucket quite often in the first aid for mental health courses that I run. So in
Yep.
my stress bucket was just the normal stresses of life. At this point, I was about 30 years old, just before 30.
Mm.
I started a new job as a in a leadership position I'd never had before, in
Yeah.
a school I never worked at before, with a department and a team that I didn't know the dynamics, and I'd never worked with them. So there was lots of dynamics there that were in the stress bucket. But also at this point in time, there was loads of personal stuff going in. So what I now in the work that I do, and when I sort of coach people and when I teach people in terms of becoming a first aider for mental health, I think of the bucket with having two sides, two parts to it: your professional stress, personal stress. And if one's high and one's low, the other can sort
Like
of
balance
be,
out.
yeah, balance out. Balance. But for me, there was a lot of stress in both, because my person, my wife and I just had our first child. She was a deputy head at the time,
Yeah.
and she was unfamiliar with the territory of kind of being on your own at home. She's used to running and being a leader, and she really struggled with a lot of mums listening to this will know what I mean in terms of the mum guilt and the comparison to other mums.
Yeah,
And
totally.
her sort of bigger identity at this time was being a professional leader, not a mum. So she struggled with that, and was diagnosed with postnatal depression. So she was finding things difficult. I was working a lot. We had our first child, and my mum was also recently diagnosed with cancer and was navigating cancer treatment. So that was a big stress in the background, and all of that just was increasing. And beyond, above all of that, really, was the expectation I had of myself to successful. This, in psychology, we talk about need to achieve and need to avoid failure personality. Very much always have been, still am, a need to achieve personality. And but then when I failed the exam, the test in the Navy, that kind of made me, one, in some respects, need to avoid failure, but also had this need to achieve. So I validate myself in terms of my professional successes. So much pressure I was putting on myself. All of that in the stress bucket. And then what was the real tipping point for me, where there was absolutely no tolerance in the top, was when my wife went back to school after her maternity leave. There was just no time left in the day, and I couldn't work 70-hour weeks because she was a deputy head. So I had to step up as a parent, and that I found difficult in terms of timings, in terms of time in the week. And that's when it just all started to get too much for me, and the pressure on. And eventually I had the courage to go to the doctors, but it took a hell of a long time, months and months, to tell them how I felt, and was prescribed antidepressants, which I reluctantly took because I thought that was failure, which it absolutely is not. And it's what drove a lot of the research that I've done in mental health. And it's just a top up of hormones, essentially, because my biochemistry of my body was just absolutely in bits. I was mentally injured. But no one was there supporting me with that. No one knew anything about that. But I still carried on. I was in crisis, and I was sort of just plowing on through. And then a few months later, it just all got too much, and I found myself on a weekend, on a Sunday, classic time for a teacher to be working. Roasted, marking exam papers, and I was rocking on the spare bed, having suicidal thoughts, and it was scary. And I didn't really, the thoughts were really, how could I end my suffering? And I've learned this a lot now for people. Most people who are suicidal, is sort of through the training I've done, the workshops, and also working with people now who are suicidal. It's not that they want to die often. It's that they want to end their suffering. And that was exactly my situation was. I didn't want to die. That's what scared me. I had a beautiful daughter. I had a wonderful, beautiful wife. I had a great life. I wanted to support my mum, and it was just crippling. So at that time, I knew I'd tried it my way, and I went back to the doctors and said,
Mm,
"Look, this happened. This has happened. Just tell me what I want to do." Because in many ways, I was thinking, I've got two options here. If I carry on, I'm going to end up ending my own life, and
mm,
then no one wins, or I get advice from the doctor and
mm,
and try to take back control
yeah.
of my life. Um, and that was the going back to the doctor and just saying, you tell me. They
Mm,
signed me for 1 month, which rolled into 2 months.
mm, mm,
And in that time, I promised myself I would do everything in my power to never feel like that ever again.
right.
And proudly, I haven't. Never.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Chris, for sharing this. Like, it's like for being so vulnerable, actually sharing your story, and like I think it also segues really well onto the idea of mental health first aid, right? So we mentioned earlier that you're a mental fitness coach. Do you want to tell us a bit about that? Because it, to me, it feels like you're trying to be the person that you needed at the time, right?
100%.
Mm,
Um, I went to my line manager. So after I first went to the doctors and got antidepressants, I told my line manager what had happened, that I was struggling and that I was on antidepressants, and they were not trained or prepared to support me well enough.
mm,
And if they were, I think that my mental health could have improved. I don't think I wouldn't have needed to be signed off.
mm,
Uh, I actually think it's the best thing that's ever happened to me, because I learned so much about myself and about mental health and mental fitness. But I am trying. You're absolutely right. To There's two parts to what I'm doing with MindFirst. Really, it's one, trying to train people to be there for others when they need them, and how to do that
mm,
in first aid sense. And number two is then from a me personally coaching sense, actually being there for people.
mm,
The NHS is overrun. It's very difficult to get counselling. It's very difficult to get support. There's wonderful charities out there that will
mm,
help manage, but there's not many providers. There's not many places you can go to actually overcome the sort of psychological, the cognitive barriers that cause people to burn out, cause people
mm,
to be um, have stress and anxiety, and so that's what I did for myself, is like to
yeah.
prevent myself from feeling like that again. I had to educate myself. I had to
Mm,
learn
mm,
about the science of happiness, about positive psychology. I had to do extra courses and retrain myself, and then when I started coaching and supporting others, it was just amazing to see the progress that people made, and like, and most importantly, the professional productivity that
mm.
they gain after improving their mental fitness is brilliant. Actually, working fewer hours and being more impactful. That's like what motivates me now.
Mm, sure, sure, sure. So I'm just curious, like, I know you wanted to go on a deeper dive into mental health and mental fitness. Was there a particular area that you wanted to talk about a bit more?
Um, don't know really. Good question. I think the awareness of maybe a bit of the difference. So I think mental health has had a huge awareness campaign in this country, in the UK, and probably others in the world recently. COVID
COVID, yeah, yeah, yeah.
really amplified how vulnerable everybody is, and people are talking more about mental health, which is good. But mental fitness is is a more positive idea. So there's a lot of people that say to me, I really value the work that you do. I really think it's great, Chris, but I, I've never really had mental health, so I don't really understand it.
Mm,
And that doesn't make any sense as a comment. And quite a few people have said this to me. What they mean is I've never had a mental illness. What has mental health? And it's a scale from positive to negative. You can have
yeah.
positive mental, have negative, just like physical health.
Mm,
We can be coping, but we can have positive or negative physical health. But mental fitness is linked with proactively exercising your mind in order to create in many ways, resilience to cope with life's adversities
mm,
before they even happened. So, I see mental fitness being like the psychological, biochemical, and neurological readiness for life's adverse challenges.
mm,
And it's at a structural level of the brain.
yeah.
We live, so it's kind of re-educating people on what they can do to prevent poor mental health
Mm.
and encourage positive mental health through developing their mental fitness.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, from the term mental fitness, it does give off the idea that it's something we can work on, right? Something we can, like you said, positively work on and do something about, like on a more daily basis, rather than waiting until we have a problem, like a mental health illness or situation, and actually proactively do something about it. Are there any particular myths that you think we should bust in terms of mental fitness or mental health?
Myth number one is everyone has mental health.
Mm, mm,
And I guess myth number two is everyone can improve their mental fitness to have
mm.
more capacity for the intensity of life.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
within about 8 months, let's go with, yeah, probably about, okay, 12 months. So from starting the new job that I had to rocking on my spare bed feeling suicidal was near to the day 12 months.
Mm,
That's a huge shift from someone and I would have been in that category of I've never had mental health, and I would,
mm.
and I guess this is the key, is I was well, I still am 6'2", haven't changed my since I was about 13. Actually, I was a bit of a unit,
Yeah.
and rugby playing, PE teacher who was really, well, I said, I'm confident and extroverted. I could stand up in front of a crowd, do performances on stage, sing in front of people, even though I'm pretty rubbish at singing. I'm not someone who suffers from mental health, but I did.
Mm,
Everyone, and and if I'd have had someone explaining this to me and teaching me through the ways that I educate others, it would help. So the second myth is everyone can improve their mental fitness to cope with challenges that they don't even know exist yet,
mm.
or more confident, form to a higher level. So and you don't know what you don't have, right?
So true, yes.
So like with physical fitness, people say, oh, I feel fairly fit. I go to the gym once a week,
Mm,
and
mm,
there's without being out of breath, I feel quite fit. But put them into a different context, and that uses different sort of fitness components, if you like,
mm.
they can't cope with those demands. So let's take, if someone is physically fit and they can play 90 minutes of football, you put them on a rugby field where they're using different muscles,
Mm,
people will really struggle because they haven't got the fitness
mm,
component required for an intense game of rugby. So what's going to happen? They get injured.
yeah, yeah.
And mental fitness is the same. You develop a level of mental fitness for the environment you're in, and then you change your environment and you're unprepared. So what I tried to do is train people to cope with any environment.
Mm, mm, mm,
And that really is the core of that is self-belief.
mm, mm, mm.
You believe in yourself, it doesn't matter what environment you're in.
Yeah,
You and most people have a low level of self-belief.
sure,
um
sure, sure.
so myths, going back to that, I sort of went off on a tangent. So yeah, one, everyone has mental health. Two, everyone can improve their mental fitness, so to prevent poor mental health but to promote positive mental health.
Mm, mhm, mhm, mhm. I'm curious, like when people come to you to get help, I don't know if that's the right term to use to get help, but anyway, people who approach you, are they normally
Yeah,
people who have an issue already, or like as in, oh, they're going through a mental health episode, or are they people who are actually looking to protect themselves, like kind of they know that, oh, life is difficult, who knows what's going to happen in the future? Let's train myself first before I go through those episodes.
really good question. People people tend to reach out to me when they're in crisis. They
Mm,
wait.
mm,
I've done the same. I would have done the same. I would have done the same. And people reach out to me personally when they're in crisis. What I've started to do now is approach organizations, so try to approach academy trusts. So I've got a couple of academies that I'm working with at the moment. And one academy is really proactive with the work that they do. They're in Berkshire, actually.
mm,
They invest in their head teachers. So none of their head teachers have asked for mental fitness coaching,
mm,
but all of them receive mental fitness coaching from me.
mm, mm,
And they none of them realized or realize, if you like, that
mm,
there's a requirement,
mm.
for them to have mental fitness coaching, until you start working with them. So
Yeah, yeah,
there's
yeah.
I'll give you an example. I'm not going to use any names, obviously, but there's actually an executive head that I'm working with, who it wasn't their choice to work with me. They are well regarded. They're quite calm.
Mm,
Aspirations to be a CEO of an academy. But when we unpicked it, so I always ask people out of 10 to rank themselves in certain areas, when I coach them, and when we start our coaching calls. And one of the areas is in self-belief. So this person's really in control of their stress and anxiety, got a great work-life balance, but their self-belief was a 6 out of 10.
mm, mm,
I was like, that's interesting.
mm,
I
mm,
picked it. That we then um, found out that there is a need to sort of be competitive with oneself. This person was a PE teacher like me,
mm,
um, and that looking for external validation in a way is really common. So they don't tend to come and find me, because most people adjust to the environment that they're in, right? And if we talk about
mm.
environment, most people slowly adjust to the internal environment that they have with their mental health, and just
Mm.
think that it's normal, and think that it is no, and this is totally me, it's normal to feel a little bit unconfident. It's normal to be um a little bit unhappy with your job
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, yeah.
It's me, right? um why make that normal?
Mm.
accept that as normal. And that's what most people do. So they don't approach me because they don't know that there is another way to feel.
That's so true. Yeah, yeah, that's so true. And actually, what you mentioned just now, I think, is almost reflecting your own story, right? So the executive head teacher that you're working with, like the need for external validation. It's like the inner child, right? Who maybe didn't get that validation when he was younger, so still continuing looking for that what when he's much older, right?
And we in that we work back to a time when they felt unconfident.
Mm,
And it was when they were about 11 years old. And
mm.
for most of us, you go back to your earliest memory of something impacting your, if we just go with confidence or self-belief, it will be childhood. And it's
Mm,
normally, and then there's some kind of link around a parental figure. and and it's all, yeah, it all goes, I mean, it all goes back to childhood, um but we don't need to dwell on that. That's the thing. Like, I think it's good to have an awareness of what your childhood was like, and how you as an individual person in that environment might have interpreted the world around you, and then created a story that either supported what you were thinking or
mm,
created. And I say story because it is, we create a story in our head. It doesn't mean it's true, because two people might look at the same situation in two different ways. So having an awareness of that story is important, but not having, you don't have to unpick it too much like that.
mm.
Okay, cool. That may or may not be why you feel this way. What's important is we move you forward.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm,
no one wants to stay there for too long. Um, and but it all, yeah, it all goes back to some kind of childhood, and then a belief that we form. Think about cognitive behavioral coaching or cognitive behavioral therapy. We form a story, we form a belief, and then
mm,
we look for evidence to support or back up that belief that we've created. So the belief I'm not good enough. Okay, real
mm,
common
mm,
people with
mm,
external validation. We're low in confidence. I'm not good enough because I didn't get picked for the football team when I was 5 years old. I'm not good enough because
I had
my
that a lot.
I'm not good enough because I didn't get into the Royal Navy when I applied the first
Yeah,
time. Um,
exactly. Yeah.
um, and we create that belief that I'm not good enough, and you look for reasons to back that up. And then the next time and if in the extreme, in with the people who are the need to avoid failure, what they do is stop actually doing the things they want to do and love, because they're afraid of not achieving it. They're afraid of failing. So they just don't try in the first place.
Sure. Yeah.
I support teaching with the children, so a lot of children who misbehave. When I was on call, I used to pick up children who were misbehaving in lessons. And then when I just got speaking with them, and I couldn't help but coach them accidentally, we sat down because I thought I could help them, and I could. There was this one just gorgeous year 8 girl
Mm.
who was always out of lessons, and when I sort of told her what I did on a part-time basis of coaching, she started to open up to me, and everything came down to the fact that she just felt psychologically unsafe in the classroom
Mm,
because she was afraid of failing. She was afraid of
mm,
getting
mm, mm,
because she had been treated unkindly by, or her interpretation of the story is that she'd been treated unkindly by a teacher once when she got a question wrong. Um, it made her feel unsafe, and so she just created these negative behaviors because she felt safer outside the classroom. So,
mm.
level of confidence, and that stays with someone throughout the rest of their life and shapes all their behaviors and decisions, and bringing it back to burnout syndrome, it then shapes the way we behave or think about ourselves in the workplace, and we can be
Absolutely. Yeah.
mean to ourselves.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Probably we're the meanest to ourselves, right? Like compared to other people. I think we're meaner to ourselves than most people are to us, right?
100%.
Yeah,
You and and then when someone is kind to you to try and give you a compliment, we bat it back.
mm.
Very few people take a compliment well.
Yeah,
They
yeah, very true. Yeah,
load it, or if it's a work related thing, they'll be like, oh yeah, but everyone does that, or everyone's doing this, or that
yeah,
person did. I say to people, it's a gift. If someone compliments you, take it as a gift, accept it,
yeah.
and let it up, because the
Mm.
opposite is batting it back, which is, if someone gave you an actual physical gift, that would be deemed as rude. If I said to you, Alan, right, I've brought you this gift as a thank you, or a celebration of how good you are at hosting podcasts,
And
um,
throw back at your face.
and then I fail going, no, thank you. It's rude, but we do this with like compliments and stuff like this. We find it very difficult to take compliments,
Mm,
and that is not helping our mental health, because it's
mm.
then this story that we're not worthy, we're not worthy of compliments, we're not very good, and it's that subconscious mind. So I think it's
Sure,
that
sure.
story ultimately, that when I help people just make that big shift of actually, you are awesome. Think
Mm,
about, stop comparing yourself to people and coming off worse.
sure, sure. Yeah, yeah,
Very
definitely.
rarely we compare ourselves to someone who we don't want to become. We compare ourselves to people who we think we want to become, and then we come up worse and we feel
Mm,
uh, worthy. Um, it doesn't sound like a nice thing to do, but compare yourself to someone who you think you're better than,
yeah,
and
yeah,
work why in your mind. You don't have to communicate this to anyone, but
sure,
that
sure.
is kind of
Yeah, yeah.
in terms of confidence, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, Chris, I mean, I'm a bit mindful of time running out, so I would just ask you one last question, which is if you could say one sentence to new teachers, that something you wanted them to know, what would it be?
I'll say a phrase and then I'll
Okay.
explain. Thing I think is so powerful for new teachers to learn, because no one tells you this, and it's linked with overworking. But if this phrase is something that they have to keep telling themselves: done is is better than perfect.
Mm,
Done,
yeah, so true.
perfect doesn't exist, because if we were creating a piece of work, you and me, and someone says let's make it perfect, it would be a different piece of work that we both produce, because
Mm,
interpretation of perfect is different to my interpretation of perfect. So in terms of planning a lesson, if we were both told to plan the perfect lesson and deliver it, it would look different, and the person watching it would have a different expectation of what perfect is. So done is better than perfect,
yeah,
and try and stick to that.
sure. Right. So just now you talked about your advice for new teachers. I wonder what advice you might have for just teachers in general, whether they have or have not been through any mental health episodes before. Like, would you have any advice for teachers in general?
I think there's yeah, interesting. I think there's advice for two types of teacher. A teacher who is struggling in the profession right now,
Mm,
and maybe a teacher who is coping in the profession.
mm,
And are some I hear that are thriving. Uh,
Hopefully.
those who are struggling, I would say the easy option is to look for another job. There's loads of teachers who are looking to get out,
Mm,
but I think they need to ask themselves why they're looking to get out. Are they looking to get out for the right reasons? Is it running away from teaching or running towards something else? Now, what I
mm,
mean by that is I don't teach in the classroom anymore, and I'm gutted by that in many ways, because I left it with a positive relationship, but I was
mm,
running towards something else, a
mm,
new um, a new career as a sort of a business person, setting up MindFirst Education and trying to
Yep.
help. I wasn't before. I was running away.
Mm.
So if you're running away, there might be regret later on.
Mm.
So and if you run away from education, your mind will follow you. So your problems will follow you. The
Yep.
way that you approach work will follow you. So there's a great book called "Wherever You Go, There You Are." Let me just make sure I've got, yeah, "Wherever You Go, There You Are." John Kabat-Zinn,
Yep.
um, a a mindfulness sort of expert, and it's so true. Like, work on yourself, work on your mind, and then
Mm.
once after you've done that, if you still want to leave teaching, then go for it.
Mm.
Um, and run towards something. So try not to escape. But then, having also said that, if it's really, really not working for you, then have a break,
Mm.
Don't quit. Just pause that part of your life for a minute and and work on yourself, because it can be stressful. And reach out to me if you want any
Yeah, of course.
advice
Yep. Mm.
or like, yeah, I'm happy to speak to anyone. And those that are coping, um, my advice is write down how many hours a week you are working,
Mm.
and then write down how many hours you want to be working.
Right.
Work out the difference and create a plan to get where you want to go, because we're only normally paid for, it depends on counties and regions in the UK, but it's less than 35 hours a week that
Mm.
a teacher is contracted, but most work longer hours because they
Yeah.
feel they, not always because they actually need to, but they feel they should. And what are they saying no to? So if the more hours you spend in the building or at your laptop at home, the fewer hours that you are spending with people that you love, or doing
Yeah.
things you love, doing things that actually make you less stressed and happy. Um, so write that down. Write down how many hours you're actually working each week and how many hours you want to be working, what you would do with that time that you'd get back, and then work towards actually achieving it 1 hour at a time. Like, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can just be, right, I'm actually going to leave at 4 o'clock or 4:30 instead of
Mm.
5:30.
Mm.
And you put pressure on yourself, or not pressure on yourself, but you become more effective, and then actually plan something in the time that you would have to force you to go and do that. Um, to don't, don't let it become, don't let teaching become your life.
Sure.
That's a mistake people make.
Yeah.
Let teaching be the most a beautiful part of your life, but ensure that you have a life outside of work, because it will
Yeah.
keep the career going for longer, and reduce the risk of burnout syndrome.
Yeah, sure. Brilliant advice. Thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to end with your definition of happiness. So earlier you said you wanted to go back to that. So I wanted to give you a chance to just talk about your definition of happiness right now at this moment.
Yeah, it's it's actually, so I've been working on this for a while and I've been struggling, but I've recently heard someone else, a positive psychologist called Sean Acor, who
Mm.
I love very much. I love his work, and he uses it all the time. So I'm going to steal something that he stole from from the ancient Greeks.
Yep.
And I think if he's not going to get plagiarized, then I'm fine. So I like this definition. So happiness is the joy we feel moving towards our goals.
Mm.
That I love,
Yeah.
because you might not be, you might not be happy in every moment, but you can choose to feel an element
Mm.
of joy. um I just want to explain that, if I may, like a
Yeah, of
little
course. Yeah.
bit. Might be like, well, how can you always feel joy even when you're moving through adversity and challenging times? It's a choice. it's not always an easy choice. Sometimes it can be a really, really difficult choice. But so my mum, I mentioned her earlier. She died. She died
Mm,
before the pandemic. And I remember asking myself, like, it was horrible, and I miss her every day, but I couldn't control that. Like, she was, to put it
mm,
bluntly, she was dead. I was never going to change that.
mm,
I remember in my journal kind of reflecting on, do I have to feel sad?
mm,
Society tells me I should, but could I feel any joy? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Mum wouldn't want me to live in this pit of misery for the rest of my life.
mm,
And so then I sort of started to think, well, how can I learn from this? How can mum dying actually be some weird gift? And I won't go through all of my conclusions, but I've found them. And I think that really helped me to process it. And so many of my family felt angry because she was 57. She was an amazing person. She was the life
mm,
and soul of the party and the family, and she died too soon. But we could choose to be angry, but that's not going to change the situation.
mm,
So I was like, how can I find joy in this? How can I celebrate mum's death? And I did. And I was like, one way is celebrating that we gave her the most beautiful death we could
mm,
possibly give her. My
mm,
dad, my brother, myself, we were around her bed when she took her final breath. Like, deaths
mm,
don't get more beautiful than that.
mm,
And that's exactly how she would have wanted it. Just maybe a few years later, but a few years later, she might not have got the most beautiful death. She might have sadly been hit by a car
mm.
in the road
Yeah,
and had around her,
who
died on
knows,
her
right?
own.
Mm,
I know it's a bit of a morbid thing to talk about, but that was just like in the most extreme circumstances. I was like, yeah, there was a joyous moment there. It was a beautiful kind of family moment
mm,
that I was able to share. And is it okay to find joy in that? I think yes, because the alternative
mm,
is no,
mm.
and that's a negative feeling, right? So
Yeah,
that, I know it's a bit of a long-winded explanation, but yeah, happiness. This is Sean Akers' sort of stolen definition that I'm now starting to adopt until I find a better one. But happiness is the joy that we feel moving towards our goal.
yeah, sure. Thank you for sharing that as well. And I feel that shows how much control you are over, like how much control you have over your own mind, right? Because you've talked about controlling your own mind, controlling your own thoughts, and mental
Yeah.
fitness, and just the way you interpreted your mother's death. I think totally shows that to us. So really, thank you so much for sharing that with us. And yeah, so I just want to say thank you for coming onto the podcast. Really appreciate your vulnerability. And on top of that, your knowledge and your passion for the work that you're doing, because clearly you're doing really, really meaningful and impactful work. We need more people like you who are supporting teachers doing such an important work, like and very emotional work as well, right? And yeah, I just wish that we had more time. I think I should invite you again for another podcast episode. I can tell you still have loads to share, so maybe I might need to invite you again.
Yeah, apologies for going off on a few tangents, but yeah, I love this subject. I'm very open, and I'm so passionate about supporting others, and raising the awareness of mental health, opening up the conversation with solutions as well. So
Mm,
yeah, it would be an absolute pleasure, man, to come back on. It would be great. Yeah, let me know whenever it would be great.
yeah, brilliant.
Thank you
Thank
for
you,
having
Chris.
me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
That was such a fruitful conversation with Chris. And the little nuggets that I took away from the conversation were that someone having suicidal thoughts is more likely to want to end their suffering rather than actually wanting to die. And also that if you're struggling right now in your teaching job and you're considering quitting, think about whether you're running away from teaching or running towards something better. Because there's a difference between the two, and the one thing that you can't run away from is yourself. I hope you enjoyed listening to Chris's extraordinary story, and please do join us again next time on Ordinary Teachers and Students.